Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
a liberal religious community.
Welcoming
to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
We are all holding our personal joys and sorrows and that of the wider world, which seems in some moments completely on fire. But today we get to celebrate success in Louisiana. We mourn the death of a trans woman in Washington State. All of these form the cloud among us, as well as the sunshine. And so I invite you into a communion of prayer as we hold the content of our hearts and that of our world. Holy is the space between us. May we know its flowing grace. Grace for forgiveness, grace for redemption, grace for all the ways we try and try again. We try to be for each other an example of grace in a world and in a time when grace is meted out in the stingiest of servings. Let us together nurture grace and hope now and ever. For the children among us still in the bud, for the youth this morning newly blessed, for the ones who now live in the midpoint of their lives, and for our elders who yearn to see the world wildly bloom. Holy is the space between us. And may the congregation say, Amen. I invite you into a communion of silence.
Down in the basement of First Parish, over 20 years ago, as a teen, I used to go to our high school youth group. Earlier in the year, under the guidance of our then youth program coordinator, Krista, and the older youth members, I did something I had never done before. I had an explicit conversation with my peers about how we wanted to be together. In my childhood, I had certainly been told how I ought to interact with others, oftentimes by adults. In the Catholic upbringing I had recently left, I certainly had been given morals and rules to explicitly follow. And certainly I was developing my own sense of how I wanted to be with others, sometimes when I discovered how I wished I had been. These conversations in the Bailey Room, where the youth still meet to this day, were different. We were empowered to take ownership over that process, and we did it together as teens. Take a classic youth community conundrum, swearing. Could we swear in youth group? We considered that bubbly, transgressive power of that decision, what it might mean to claim a type of speech that might not be allowed in schools, say. Someone may have even waxed poetically about how nothing quite intensifies like the F word. But in our conversations, other voices emerged. the older youth safeguarding this consensus-building process for everyone. People could articulate how swearing made them uncomfortable, and certainly we reckoned with a swear's power to belittle, hurt, and scare. Ultimately, I think we decided that swearing was okay if it wasn't directed at someone else. And in the process, we were revealing something about our community. We valued not hurting each other with our words over our unbridled freedom to say whatever we wanted. In my memory, this whole conversation was extraordinarily long, stretching out over many nights of deliberation. But in the end, we had conjured an articulation of our community's aspirations, hidden behind a written list of community norms. This conversational process, still practiced by our youth group today, embedded in me a core understanding of my faith and the traditions that have formed it. We choose how we go together. If you are here for the first time today wondering what we're all about, or you're newly wondering what's at core for a place you've belonged to for many years, may I offer this anchor? The generative question at the heart of our liberal religious tradition may well be, how shall we be together? It's in the process of figuring that out together that we constitute the core of something that might be called Unitarian Universalism. More on that later. But leaving behind that basement, I didn't find another spiritual home base right away. And it would be a few years more before I would join another Unitarian Universalist community. Yet I carried the core I found in those constitutive conversations with me, seeking communities that took that question seriously. How shall we be together? In the weird experimental school I attended after high school with its practices of self-governance, in the values-based food co-ops and housing situations I sought out in my 20s that met on Sunday afternoons for house meetings, in the intentional friendships I tried to cultivate and tend, in a life partnership with my wife Liz that began nearly 13 years ago. Last month, just as the second part of my parental leave began, with our daughter Hazel vaccinated and a childhood friend in town with her daughter, we decided to go to the Science Museum. The plan was to meet at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now around 8 o'clock, with Hazel waking us up a few times that night previous, Liz and I strained between getting up to start preparing for the outing and sleeping a little more during Hazel's first nap. We decided for Liz to keep resting, and I started the prep. Tired and a little overwhelmed with the deadline in a nebulous baby-driven time that is life with an infant, I let the stress get to me. By the time Liz was up again, it was unlikely we'd be able to get out the door on time. Instead of gracefully readjusting, I started getting a little stinky pants. Giving Liz a hard time for not getting up sooner, for all the steps she needed to get ready. It wasn't fair. This went on for some minutes while we hustled around the apartment, my internal storminess breaking out into little snippy comments. I won't belabor it, but trust me, I'm not in the right, despite what I thought at the moment. And then, some in-breaking moment. We're both in the kitchen, Hazel in Liz's arms, me with the stroller. Something shifted. I looked into Liz's eyes. I knew this was not the right way to be together. I said as much, admitted how we had both agreed to rest and recovery for her was important and is important, how we are doing this hard thing that is parenting, how our friends love us, even if we're late. Of course they will. That we're on the same team. And I'm sorry for not treating her that way by snipping. Liz got it. She knew I meant it. We bounced back fairly quickly from my ugly, stressed moment, tuning into the ways we've talked about and learned to be together. That phrase for us, on the same team, is a big one in our shared conversation. Through these many years, but especially in the commitments we've made to each other in our marriage. And I'm different after that moment too. In these past weeks, that early sheepishness gave way to a little reorientation, a little closer to what I might aspire to be as a husband and a father. To try to put patience and love above being on time. We all face these very human moments, I trust. Moments when the ways we show up with one another fall short of our aspirations. Frustration, thoughtlessness, confusion, disappointment. How shall we be together can be an elusive question to answer these days. When we live at a time when our civic empowerment may feel too diffused, much less actively undermined, to have a tangible impact on the way our town or state or country is governed. When the strictures and demands of our jobs may overwhelm our ability to show up with kindness and humanity. When we're just trying to get through hardship, the strains of caregiving, the estrangement of a family member, the arrival of a diagnosis. Not always are we afforded this gift this community gave me in high school, to ask me to take on the responsibility with my peers of deciding how we'd like to be together, to give us the space for that, to help us learn from that process. But, and this is the weirdest part of the sermon, I might liken trying to navigate through life without these conversations to trying to dance through a living room without the lights on. Tripping over the sofa we didn't know was there, stumbling over the lip of a rug, worried about running into the table. The conversations we have together help us turn the lights on. The Unitarian Universalist tradition we draw from here at First Parish has called these conversations about choosing how we go together covenant. Back in March, Reverend Jonifer spoke to us about how covenants are the means by which we journey together. As a minister in your midst, charged in part to be one of the keepers of our tradition's stories, let me share with you two of them. Back in the early 1800s, before anyone was really calling themselves an American Unitarian, there were congregations around here coming from the Puritan tradition. One important part of that tradition came from how congregations made decisions, like who their ministers would be. The parish, which was the name for those who were allowed to vote in town, could vote to call their own ministers. This congregation called its first minister in 1678. Hence, it's Arlington's First Parish. Well, in the early 1800s, the belief in the capacity of human reason and human goodness challenged the puritanical and Calvinist notions that the Bible was infallible and only the elect could be saved. These people, reading the Bible, put their minds to it and didn't find much support for the idea that God had three parts. They believed instead in a single God, which challenged the idea that Jesus was fully divine. This was scandalous. So much so that the Trinitarians started mocking and shunning the ministers who held these beliefs as Unitarians. Not until around 1815 would the Unitarians positively claim that label for themselves around here. And by 1825, they reluctantly broke from the Calvinists and made the American Unitarian Association. But I tell this old story for a remnant I often overlook. The congregations with Unitarian ministers, as our First Parish became in 1829, rarely chose to make theological difference a barrier for inclusion, like their Calvinist siblings had. Almost assuredly, some congregants held wide-ranging views about the divinity of Jesus, just as we do today. A liberal religious sensibility defined their character, in contrast to an emphasis on the right beliefs held by more Orthodox Christians at the time. It's this early glimmer of theological pluralism that grew over the centuries, accepting transcendentalist and humanist and non-Christian and Jewish and earth-centered sources of truth within our communities. I might name at the heart of even those Unitarians back then a commitment to go together, asserting a value in human reason and goodness over a need for theological orthodoxy. It's a value we hold here together today, perhaps encapsulated by those words on the back of your order of service: "You sing my hymn, I sing yours." Now fast forward from the 1800s, now it's the 1950s, and the Unitarians, a tradition who are grounded in human goodness, and the Universalists, a tradition grounded in God's love, started spending more time together, especially their youth groups. As young adult member here, Genevieve Baldwin recounts in her quite amazing religious studies undergraduate thesis on youth movements. The Unitarians and the Universalist youth were the ones who gave their traditions the grounds for merger. Drawn together by bonds of relationship forged at shared conferences and gatherings, seeing the commonalities in their national movements, they formally merged their two organizations in 1953, long before the adults got around to it by 1961. The process, though, as you might guess, was careful and intentional. The Unitarian youth were a little bit more politically radical and had a more radical orientation towards youth autonomy. The Universalist youth were more God-centric in their religious expression. Over several years at big national gatherings, the two groups had long conversations, deliberations, and eventually votes, each not wanting to lose the character of their core, but also open to the transformations that might happen when they choose to go together. Commemorating that moment, an adult advisor there, Sam Wright, wrote a song, long called the Liberal Religious Youth Hymn, set to the tune of Sibelius's Finlandia. We sang it today. We would be one. Pledging themselves to that great cause of human understanding and what in themselves is true, as the song goes, the youth in this process discovered their values and the grounds by which they could make the road together. The answers to that question, how shall we go together, is not in fact just a list of rules and norms. My youth group's covenanting about swearing wasn't just about what we say or don't, but a value in kindness and respect. My marriage vows weren't just about a rule about not being snippy, but putting a value in care and compassion at the center. The early Unitarians weren't defined just by a particular theological view, but a value in a deeper trust in human capacity. The youth movements joined not just by merging their boards, but by fusing a shared sense for their leadership and empowerment that still lives on today in our traditions of youth ministry. I might put an even finer point on it. It was through the process of covenant making that we affirm, discover, unearth, negotiate, and claim our deepest aspirations together. My invitation to you is to attune, especially when the going gets rocky, to the deeper values that are affirmed, challenged, and reasserted through the ways we make connections and community together. In my own life, I've put hand motions to this. If you would go along with me, I want to show you what they are. I always wonder, how do we get from this to this? And I think the answer is that when we're here, we have to tune in to something, and it helps us open to this. You, by being here, whether it is your first week or your 40th year, are invited into this process by which we make and remake our community life together. And to be honest, I know you are already doing this work. Sure, there are committees, staff teams, religious education classes, high schoolers, ministers, covenant groups, and governing boards that all have covenants born from irregular conversations amongst those groups. First Parish is a place where we practice putting intention into how we are together. But when I say you're already doing this work, I mean that in your parenting, in your caregiving, in your work, in your friendships, relationships, your civic commitments, your voluntary associations, and your membership in religious community, you are already on the soil to explore and grow how we are to be together. After the service, members of this community, called our First Parish Covenant Task Force, have invited you to engage a renewed process about articulating to one another how we want to be together at First Parish. Unitarian Universalist communities like ours have engaged this process with compelling and creative results that the task force collected. I urge you to check out the gallery of these covenants that they have in the parlor, perhaps wondering theologically with me, what vision of community does this one aspire to? And with those values in mind, perhaps we might wonder, if we were to put words to our great aspirations and values here, what would they be? What might we continue to practice living into them? Unitarian Universalism and our community here both carry the legacy of those who choose to go together. We put our trust not in unchangeable faith statements, but a commitment to navigate the space between the way things are and the way we aspire to be, with care, intention, and collaboration. May we all feel in this place the welcome into building those aspirations together, and the responsibility to live for each towards making them more so.